Hello everybody, here is Mike Karimani speaking, your host for DevNet series. De facto, today I want to talk about 3 different data formats. If you search on Google for data formats, then you will probably find dozens of them out there. But these 3 are somehow so special and famous among others. So you may ask yourself, why? Because they're somehow a good mixture of human readable and computer readable stuff. Something in between. So they have structures and rules. So with that being said, anyone can use them. The first one I want to talk about is called XML, which stands for Extensible Markup Language. So you can see an example of it right here. As you can see here, XML describes its data with something called tag. That's the information inside of those pointy brackets. It's look like HTML. So if you're already familiar with HTML, then you wouldn't have any problems to understand XML. So actually, when you look a little bit more at this masterpiece, you will understand how descriptive it is and explains what is really going on with your data. So let's talk about some of the advantages of using XML. So there is in fact a lot of legacy support for it. So what do I mean by that? I mean it has been around for a long time. And a lot of softwares already support XML to transfer data to and from a system. So if you're working in a company which owns and works with old devices which are out of support for now, probably XML would be the only modern format that it supports. XML is also an awesome data format for SOAP. So if you're not familiar with SOAP, that's not a problem at all. It's actually a web-based API protocol and heavily relies on XML for its transmission. Now, after talking about profits of using XML, let's talk about its downsides. Most probably one of the biggest disadvantages would be its verbosity. If you take a look at the length of it, you'll understand that it's too long in comparison to the other data formats. Even though it should do exactly the same stuff as in JSON and YAML. The problem arises when you have a lot of data with those extra brackets, which are going to add up, and if you want to transfer all of them on the internet, well, you know what I mean, you know what I'm saying. Well, extra data means extra bandwidth, and it eventually leads to extra costs for the users. So with that being said, your objective would be to minimize the amount of data that you're going to use. Then at this point, it's the right time to jump into the world of JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. One of the best things about JSON, as its name suggests, it's just a reflection of how you write objects inside a JavaScript code. So let's talk more about its advantages first. So first things first, it became so popular and widely adopted because JavaScript had actually become the programming language of the internet. And therefore, JSON in fact became the data format of the internet. It's also much more cleaner in comparison to XML, as you can see its size and length here. As you can see here, you have some colons, brackets, and curly braces. As an instance, there is no necessity for writing pony bracket created, and at the end of the line, slash created pony bracket to end of this line. You can write INE1 to 3 without having to write a lot. And the big news is that whitespace is absolutely irrelevant in JSON. So you don't have to pay extra cost to your provider for just the transmission of a bunch of white spaces. So all the white spaces can be erased, and at the end of the day, you will have a long line of text which means exactly the same thing, and eventually you wouldn't end up in a syntactically different code. It's native to JavaScript, which means that you can copy and paste this code right there into a JavaScript file. So you can just simply say object is equal to whatsoever this text. So in summary, JSON code can be compressed and shrunk down in just a long line, which means exactly the same as it was written here. So it's a great feature, you don't have to pay a lot of money for that, isn't it? And the last one for today's session is YAML, which stands for YAML Int Markup Language. This is even lighter in comparison to JSON. So it looks like it's the best of the both worlds when it comes to bandwidth optimization, since it's so straightforward and don't necessarily need those brackets, and it's easier to read like a book. You know what I mean? I wished I could read my books in YAML format, but it has definitely a couple of differences. So first of all, it's highly readable or legible. So what I mean with legible? Let me explain it to you. So as you can see here on the official website of YAML, yaml.org, the entire homepage is laid out in YAML format, as you can see here. The inventors and developers of the website wanted to persuade the users how readable the YAML is, even much more compact in comparison to JSON. So everything what you have here is a couple of dashes and columns. You know what? One of the best use cases of YAML is it's completely convenient and suitable for writing configuration files, like configuration files of an ASA, of Cisco devices, Juniper devices, because it's completely readable. So let's imagine that company A is hiring a person, a senior sysadmin, and for whatever the reason, I don't know, due to COVID-19, this senior person is gonna get fired. And when the company again decides to hire a cheaper candidate, the junior candidate can read through the configuration so easily because of readability and legibility of the YAML. And the engineer shouldn't necessarily refer to a manual or go to a website to understand all the details about the config file. So the big difference is, with JSON, white space is completely garbage and don't mean anything. But on the other hand, in YAML, that white spaces and functionality is syntactically completely significant. Therefore, the best usage of it will be in configuration scenarios. So as a result, you cannot compress it and shrink it down into a one big line by removing white spaces. So these were the 3 data formats which we're going to take a closer look at in the upcoming videos and understand the pros and cons of each one. Thank you very much for having me, and I wish you stay safe during pandemic.